Good morning. The holidays, we've got a nice big crowd here. That's great. Let's see, I don't think we have any guests, but we have a great showing of members. Nice to see everybody this morning. Despite the fog, you found your way. Our first up this morning, we're going to have Ted Kenny giving us a Rotary minute.
Morning, everybody. It's almost late because I was trying to print out what I had on the printer, and it's stopped me, and it won. So I'm going to read it off of my phone. And it's not like I would need reading glasses at this age, so that's why I don't have them on.
Sure, you can get some
You couldn't
volunteers.
find them?
Yeah, I actually needed glasses to find them. Terrible catch-22. But the Rotary Minute, I researched a little bit about the Rotary avenues of service and wanted to share those and also share what this club does, because it matches up so well. Avenues of service. Club service focuses on making clubs strong. A thriving club is anchored by strong relationships and an active membership development plan. Vocational service calls on every Rotarian to work with integrity and contribute their expertise to the problems and needs of society. Community service encourages every Rotarian to find ways to improve the quality of life for people in their communities and to serve the public interest. International service exemplifies our global reach in promoting peace and understanding. So I started looking at what we do as a club. Fuel assistance, raising matching funds to provide heating fuel to those in need. Williston Community Food Shelf, volunteering to support the provider of critical nutritional assistance. Handicapped access, assisting community members who need modification to access to their homes. Williston Central School Youth Mentor, donating time and energy to help children succeed. Rotary Youth Leadership Awards, recruiting and funding local student participation in leadership development. The Deb Beckett Memorial 5K. Parks and natural areas, maintaining and beautifying local nature trails, canoe access, and benches. So I thought that our club has a wonderful cross-section of the avenues of service. And I think we should all take inspiration from that and keep up the good work. Thank you.
Thank you, Ted. And now Phil will give us our inspiration tip.
So, what is inspiration? What inspires? Well, I can tell you my own experience. I was inspired to be a good person because my parents were very involved with the local government. My father was the chairperson of the village trustees for 30 some years and always involved in the village affairs in the little village of Wells River, which has had about 500 people. What inspires me to participate in Rotary? Well, I've always watched people who were willing to give, were willing to participate, were willing to join in groups that were working to improve life for people. And you know what? It's fun. It really is. It's a good time. So that inspires me to participate in Rotary. What inspired me to take the job that I took? Well, when I was growing up on the farm at the age of 9 or 10, my father recognized that I was not interested in herding cattle. It was a dairy farm, and I had zero interest in taking care of animals, especially cows. They're not very much fun to take care of. So my father recognized that. And since my father was also a former mechanic for the Vermont Transit Bus Company, which is now CCTA, he started getting me involved in the machinery equipment support business. So I was doing repairs on machinery, and that was sort of fun, and I kind of liked that. And I thought maybe I would be inspired to be a garage mechanic. And then one day he asked me, "Are you interested in radios or anything like that?" And I said, "Yeah, I'd like to try something." So he, excuse me while I fix my hearing aid. He got me a Heathkit radio set, which you got to put together the little pieces one at a time. And I put it together and it worked. And I was really pumped. Hey, this is fun. What do you do with it? Well, it turns out I ended up getting a degree in electrical engineering and working for IBM for 44 years. And I always worked in electronics and especially in computers. And the inspiration from that came from my father, who had the idea that he should try to get me involved in something like that. So what is inspiration? It's something that you see or something that you hear that turns you on, that makes you interested. Why are you in Rotary? And how does it make you feel?
Thank you, Bill. All right, just a few announcements and then we'll get to the main event of the morning. First off, just a reminder that next January 4th, we'll have a business meeting. So I'll ask each of the committee chairs to prepare, roughly a 5-minute report out on what they'd like the club to know. And then with the remaining time we'll have, we can talk about the second half of our Rotary year and are there any new priorities or questions people have, or just a little open conversation that I think might surface ideas or concerns and so on. And then on the 11th, the South Burlington Club will be joining us. We're looking forward to that. And then just a reminder that February 10th, we're going to have our first ever Bill Skiff Story Slam. And you'll be hearing lots more about that soon. And many of you are already involved in the planning for that. And I think that's going to be great fun. And then Sally, I think you had an announcement.
Yeah, just quickly, we'll be sending out a survey to ask you questions about the Jonathan Mill Senior Luncheon. What you really liked about it, what, if anything, we should change, your comments. It's a short survey. I just want you to be on the lookout for it.
Great. Thank you. And with that, since you're standing, introduce our speaker.
I will. So, first of all, I want to thank the people who have given their classification talks. It has been, it always is fascinating. And thank you, Phil, for just giving us a mini classification talk, which was also wonderful. So I'm going to introduce our first talk today. I accused Gary of being hippie and he refused to hear that. He said he'd rather be called a freak. So, Howard.
There, unlike that, yeah, I have to concede to the, okay. I do want to make one point before I start. It's a disclaimer. This kind of talk ends up with a lot of ayes
in it. I did. And I want to tell you that in all honesty, there is an I in tribe, and everything I've ever done has the tribe behind. So when I say I, it's not a personal pronoun, it's a communal pronoun of the I's. And I was lucky enough to have found a metaphor early in my life. And I'd like to read it to you. You know where it's coming from. It's Robert Hunter, straight out of the dead. It's called Ripple. If my words did glow with the gold of sunshine, and my tunes were played on the harp unstrung, would you hear my voice come through the music? Would you hold it near as if it were your own? It's a hand-me-down. The thoughts are broken. Perhaps they're better left unsung. I don't know. Don't really care. Let there be songs to fill the air. Ripple in still water when there is no pebble tossed, nor wind to blow. Reach out your hand if your cup be empty. If your cup is full, may it be again. Let it be known there is a fountain that was not made by the hands of man. There's a road, no simple highway between the dawn and the dark of night. And if you go, no one may follow. That path is for your steps alone. Ripple in still water where there is no pebble tossed, nor wind to blow. You who chose to lead must follow, but if you fail, you fall alone. If you should stand, then who's to guide you? If I knew the way, I'd take you home. It started early December, 1946, snowy morning. I was born in the Bishop de Gosbrian Hospital. You may not know where that is, but it's down on the corner. Some of you that have been here for a while before the Mary Fletcher UVM monolith began, down on the corner of Prospect and Pearl. I spent the first 16 years of my life on a dairy farm. Had the same experience Phil had. My father took one look at me and said, "You're not going to milk cows for the rest of your life, boy." And I said, "Oh, you're right. You're right." So I graduated from Essex High School, which is now a middle school out by the pool on Maple Street. And I went to UVM for a while. I was going to be an agricultural engineer. I wanted to build barns and silos and milking parlors. And they found they wanted my seat for an out-of-state student who could pay twice the tuition besides me. So in December of '66, I got 2 letters in the mail. One was from UVM saying, "Don't come back in the spring." The other was from Uncle Sam saying, "Do come to Vietnam." Well, the ripple was that I failed in both cases. I didn't go back in the spring, and I flunked my physical when they shipped me down to Albany. I went to Albany every 6 months until I was 24 years old or so to get weighed. They never checked my height, which was neat. My father gave me a check. I loaded my car and he said, "Find a school." And luckily I went south and I went to Castleton State College, where I graduated in 1969 with a liberal arts degree in English and a teaching degree and a wife. The teaching degree lasted a lot longer than the wife. I hate to say this, but I was in love. I think she loved the fact that I was going to get her out of her alcoholic, abusive home. So after 5 years, we parted ways, and we went about our business. I got hired in Essex Town by Dale Lamphere, 1969. He had a problem, and I suited his problem. He read on my CV, but I've spent 3 years as a bouncer in the Hampton Manor, dealing with drunk college kids, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday night. And what he had was a problem that needed a bouncer. He had a war between the townies and the IBM kids that came to school in Essex Town. They were at war with each other. I had an 8th grader. He turned 16 during the 8th grade year. He wasn't a happy boy. He'd never been a happy boy. The reason he came to school was so he could beat the crap out of any IBM kid that he spotted in the lunch line or before and after school. That was his modus operandi. So I ran the before and after school bus, waiting in the gym period, as well as taught English. I did that for 5 years and then decided that maybe I had my Stafford loan paid off. Maybe it was time to do something else. And I had reconnected with a college friend who became my wife of 50 years now. And she just got back from wandering around Europe for 3 months and wasn't ready to stop and find work. So I said, let's travel. So we loaded my truck and decided we'd do a cross-country cruise. Well, to go cross-country, you have to start at one edge and go all the way to the other edge. So we drove as far east as the road would go, which is the Gaspé Peninsula, then turned west and went to Tofino in the Vancouver Island, which is where the road ends. We did the entire thing in about a month and a half, 2 months. Wandered back south because they wouldn't let us work in Canada. We didn't have the right papers. We weren't valuable. They wanted Susan. She was a nurse. They wanted to send her to the oil fields. Been good money, but not dealing with abrupt trauma is what the nurses did in those places, you know, in a oil drilling situation. So we went back to Seattle, got jobs. I worked as a short order cook in a Mexican restaurant. Susan was a temp nurse all over Seattle. We spent a good almost a year there. Loved it. It was wonderful. My brother called us up and said, I'm getting married. Would you be my best man? And of course, he lived here. So we packed the truck. We wandered back across country again for a month or two, ended up here and decided that this was a good place to stay. Somewhere in his infinite wisdom, my grandfather had deeded my brother and I 5 acres of land each on the property over the hill here. I'm a 4th generation Willistonian. And from my mother's side, from my father's side, he was a mutt. He's been here, his family's been here forever. They've tracked it back to the early 18th century, of every kind, shape, and description, but Vermonter. So we gave my brother and I each 5 acres. My wife and I decided that maybe we were going to stay here for a while. So we built a house. I took down a barn on Walker Hill Road, Bill Lacass's barn. Took all the pegs out. At the time I was working for a high steel company, so we had cranes. I got a couple of the crane men to come with their crane on the trip from Burlington to Morrisville. And they took the barn down, stacked up the wood, pounded the pegs out. I trucked it over to my property and put it back together, and it's still standing. Believe it or not, it's still standing. We live in it. 1836. Somebody took the time and energy to carve out those beams. They're spectacular. So we started to build the house. I'm still building. There's still spots where the sheetrock hasn't been painted or taped. They will be somebody else's problem at this stage in the game. I promise you that. And so we stayed. We built the house. My son, in 1977, was born in the teepee we were living in. We picked that up on our way back across country in Oakland, California. My middle son was born when our house was 1 story on the 1st floor. And my daughter was born 2 years later when we had a bedroom on the 2nd floor. I delivered all of my children, which is an experience that's beyond words. Anyway, I met the midwife at the door with Evan in my arms saying, "You're just a little late, Barb. Thank you for coming, but you missed the show." One of the things I learned at being on that farm for 16 years was about life and death, trust, responsibility, 24/7, 365. And those are good lessons. I did 31 years teaching school in Williston. I first got a job driving school bus, and I'd pull up out front every day, and Bob Mitchell would come out to usher the kids in, and I'd say, "Bob, you got a job for me?" Eventually he did. It was similar to the job I had in Essex Town. They put me in a room, they called it an AV room. It had no windows, 2 doors in and out, and gave me all the kids that nobody else could deal with. I spent 5 years in that room. until they let me out of there. Into the, I guess it was called General Pop. I was on strictly no pop with those kids. But it was an incredible learning experience about how to help people be people, be real people. And so there's a lot to education that we miss. I had great hopes for COVID as far as redirecting the focus of education. It didn't come through, but that's okay. It never does. Education's a constantly changing and yet very stuck in its ways profession. So we did the best we could, making it fun. 31 years, never regretted a moment. My last ripple, my 42-year-old son died in February of this year. And if anybody ever says, you'll get over it, you don't. You go through it. So, as the dead say, as Robert Hunter said, if I knew the way, I would take him home. Thank you.
So Gary, there might be a couple of questions. So sit down.
Well, the first answer is, yeah, I cry in public. On the back. Any questions?
Yeah.
Before I hike?
Which one of those many people that you were, did you enjoy the best?
Teaching. God, if
Yeah.
there ever was a job,
You were a well-loved teacher at Williston.
I appreciate that. There is no better. I got Uncle Sam made me the teacher. He got me the education. You stayed out of Vietnam if you stayed in school. I stayed in school, got my degree, and then continued to work. They drafted the guy out of the room right across from me. He was from Montpelier, and Montpelier had a low population of draft eligible kids. So they drafted him right out of the classroom. The lady behind me in the room behind me lasted till Thanksgiving, went home, never came back. It wasn't a fun place to work. That's why I did 5 years. 5 years. It was, I hate to badmouth IBM, but IBM ran the school, and they didn't understand that in their business, they get a chance to evaluate the raw material. In the education department, you don't get that chance. You take what they give you and you make the best of it. It really upset me a lot dealing with the people in shirts and ties who come in and say, this has got to happen, this has got to happen, this has got to happen. And maybe I'd love it to, but look at what you gave me. So yeah, I like being a teacher. It was fun. It made your heart strong. Any other questions so I can sit down and cry?
So I have to say, there's nothing like asking people to do something. Like give a class and then doing it yourself. Holy smokes.
We wouldn't have it any other way.
Exactly. So, I'm gonna read off a list of things I've done. Pay close attention because there'll be a quiz afterwards. Of course not. And you can read tragedy in this story. But I think we become who we are from what happens to us, the people that we meet, and those who teach us life lessons. I don't see this as tragic, and I think we're blessed by all of it. So, I grew up in West Brattleboro, Vermont. I'm a 7th generation Vermonter and about a 10th or 11th generation American. My childhood was not happy. I'm an only child. My mother was my father's second wife. And it was pretty clear early on why he was divorced. He was a raging alcoholic. And alcoholic families are not happy families. My mother was a very hardworking French Canadian whose family came from Canada through Malone. Her mother died having their 17th child because the Catholic Church wouldn't let her not have any more children. So my mother ran our little independent grocery store in West Brattleboro for years, working 16, 18 hours a day, every day. My father participated about 6 months of every year. I went to grade school in Westby. I went to Brattleboro Union High School, where interestingly, in a class of 200 kids who graduated, 6 of us went to medical school, which was interesting. I went to UVM undergrad. I was so excited to get out of the little town and come to the big city. You know, I'm gonna feel really old when I finish this list, but anyway. I finished undergrad and I went to UVM Medical School. We were not welcomed women in medical school. We were an experiment, and we were told that we were an experiment. There were maybe, I think, 7 or 8 of us in a class of 75. The tables have seriously turned now. But we were told at every turn that we weren't wanted. We were made embarrassed by the sexist jokes that the teachers always told. We were taught by some very special people. Your father was a wonderful teacher. Chris Burns DiBiasio's father was one of my teachers. The surgeons were horrible to us. We should never have been there for surgery. I finished medical school in 74 and went off to a 1-year internship. That's when they used to have internships. In OBGYN in Buffalo. And thanks to Dan's wife, Chris, I now have a little historical thing about Deaconess Hospital in Buffalo, which no longer exists. But it was in a ghetto and it was on a highway. And the 1 month I did there in emergency room enabled me to come back here and work full-time in the Fanny Allen emergency room. We saw everything in Buffalo. So I came back in 75 and I worked in the Fanny Allen ER and at the Women's Health Center in Burlington. Then in 76, I moved to DC and I worked part-time in the University of Maryland Health Center. University of Maryland at that time was 40,000 students. They were their own town. They had their own health center. And I worked there with a wonderful GYN woman named Maggie Bridwell. I also was made medical director of Planned Parenthood of Metropolitan Washington, which meant that I was in charge of 13 clinics from Virginia, DC, and Maryland. And all of the men and one woman who were my attending physicians were much older and more experienced than I was. But I was hired in order to start a program of nurse practitioners there, which is what we had worked with at the Women's Health Center. So I also taught for a year that year in Baltimore in the Planned Parenthood Family Planning Training Institute, teaching people about family planning. Then I finally settled down enough to do my residency in DC in a hospital called Washington Hospital Center. I have never gravitated toward academic medical centers, and Washington Hospital Center wasn't. The chairman of our department wanted us to go to Hopkins to do a rotation. And the 3 of us in that year walked into his office and said, we won't do it. And the reason we wouldn't do it is that the highly academic centers treated their junior residents like crap, and visiting residents or interns, forget it. And we said we didn't want to be treated that way. So we went to Hopkins to do pathology for a month. That was okay. While I was there, I knew I wanted to come back to Vermont to practice. And so I came up here in the last year of my residency, met Jack Skolin, who was in Essex Junction, who offered me some space. And he offered to give me space free for 6 months and half rent for 6 months, so he can make sure that I get started. He didn't have anything to worry about, I can tell you. So I came back in 1981 to start my practice. Just like in medical school, I was not welcomed. The chairman of the department did not want me here. because I was the only solo woman practitioner in OBGYN. There were 3 older gentlemen who had private practices. But the only other woman OBGYN was in the academic medical center, and they did not want me practicing here. On the opposite side, all the women in town wanted me here, happily. So I started my practice in 1981. I practiced by myself for 3 years. I was busier, as they say, than a one-armed paper hanger. I was very, very busy. And in 1981, I also met my future husband, who came from Boston, begrudgingly, to put my ultrasound machine together. We clicked, we dated, he moved up here, we got married in 1983. And we started our very long history of travel in 1983 by going to Switzerland and France on our honeymoon. We have never stopped traveling since then. We have traveled all through Europe, the British Isles. I can name a number of countries we've been to, and they've all been more wonderful than the one before. In 1985, we had our son Pat. In 1988, we had our son Hazen. In 1989, when Will graduated from UVM Business School, we went to London on the Concorde, which was amazing. And I surprised him. He didn't know we were going. So it was great. In the interim, since that time, we've made trips to Ireland, England, Scotland, Italy, Switzerland, France, Germany, Belgium, Amsterdam, Hawaii 3 times. In the early to mid 2000s, I don't know exactly when because nobody's told me and they don't want me to know, Pat became a heroin addict. He went to college, he went to Castleton, graduated, struggled, had open heart surgery as a consequence of his addiction, was arrested, put in jail. I've got some interesting jail stories. He went to 3 different rehabs. In 2015, we sent him to Hazel and Betty Ford in Minnesota, and he got clean, and he stayed clean. He moved to Portland, Maine, and he became a peer counselor working on the streets of Portland with the mentally ill and the addicted populations. And then at Thanksgiving in 2022, he died suddenly of a hemorrhagic stroke, not related to drug use. My other son, in 2006, Hazen, went to Scotland to get a 4-year degree in bagpiping, the only school in the world that gives a degree in bagpiping. And then he stayed 2 more years in Scotland. One time, just once, I said to my husband, "Oh, what if he wants to become a lawyer or a businessman?" My husband said, "Do you think he'll ever regret playing his bagpipes in Scotland for 4 years?" I never asked that question again. He now, and he's very traveled. He's the only person I know who had to have extra pages sewn into his passport because he ran out of pages in his passport. He now lives here in Williamstown, Vermont, with his wife on an 11-acre farm with 3 horses, 4 dogs, 2 cats, and he has a full-time job working for American Meadows, and he plays his bagpipes all the time. In 2007, I retired from OB. In 2010, I retired from surgery, and in 2017, I retired completely. I became a Rotarian in 2007. I started working at the food shelf when it was opened in 2008 and became the operations manager in 2010. There it is. There you have it.
When did you become a Red Sox fan?
My father took me to Fenway when I was 8 years old, and I've been a fan ever since. I've only been to Fenway maybe half a dozen, 7 or 8 times.
Related question, I mean to interrupt your answer. Yeah, if you had to pick one, who's your all-time favorite Red Sox player? Past,
Boy,
present.
that is a tough one.
I know.
I'm torn between.
Bill Buckner.
Yeah, no.
It's my favorite.
One of my very favorites is Nomar Garcia.
Okay.
You know, because he was a nice guy
Yeah.
as well as a really good shortstop.
Nice.
Yes, John.
I don't so much have a question, though. It's wonderful to hear your story, Sally. I've lived in Chittenden County for all my adult life. And, when I was having my children in the late sixties, early seventies, there were only 2 OB/GYN offices around here, and you went to one or the other and you had no choice, and you got minimal care. And so as I got older, all the women and I knew, who do you go to for OB/GYN? And all of a sudden, this Sally Stockwell appeared on the scene, and everybody was going to Sally Stockwell. And I remembered, I'd forgotten about that because I couldn't get in. I had forgotten an appointment with her. I called and I tried and I couldn't get in. When I first came to Rotary, and all of a sudden this light bulb was exploding in my head. I said, there you are. And now she can't take care of me, but she was, let me tell you, she was the best known OB/GYN person around here, and women to a person that I ever knew loved her. So thank you for all you did for us in Richmond County. Appreciate it.
I had a patient who came in one time in August and she said, "So happy anniversary." I said, "How do you know it's my anniversary?" Because she had come to me for her baby. And when she delivered, Bob Hayward delivered her because I was on my honeymoon.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, it was a great experience being a physician in this area. It was wonderful. You talked about IBM. A lot of my patients were IBM wives, or IBMers, but mostly wives. And I was very, very busy, and I was very, very grateful. One time I spent 10 days in the hospital without coming out.
Yeah.
Because since it was a new practice, all of my patients were having their first baby. And first babies take usually a long time to come. So my office manager would call me every morning and she would say, "So are you coming out?" "No, I can't leave." 2 or 3 more came in. So she would go and tell all the lovely ladies waiting in the waiting room that I wouldn't be in, and their turn was coming. So I didn't go home for 10 days. That was fortunately before I got married, but. All right,
Thank you, Sally.
you're very welcome.
Wow. Thank you for arranging all those talks this month. It's been wonderful.
Yeah.
You're welcome. We've still got more people who haven't given their
Yeah.
talk, so don't forget, if you're missing a speaker, call somebody up and ask them if they'll do it.
Excellent idea. Okay, and where is mine?
Right, over here.
Right over there.
There it is.
I was.
You were.